Spirituality. A consciousness was everywhere inherent in existence, acting even when cancelled, is the creator of the world, the occult secret of nature, but in our material world, in our own being, consciousness has a double aspect. There is a force of knowledge, there is a force of ignorance. In the infinite consciousness of self-aware, infinite existence, knowledge must be everywhere implicit or operative in the very grain of its action. But we see here at the beginning of things apparent as the base of the nature of the creative world energy, and in conscience a total new science. This is the stroke with which the material universe commences. Consciousness and knowledge emerge at first in obscure infinitesimal movements at points in little quanta which associate themselves together. There is a tidy and difficult evolution, a slowly increasing organization, and ameliorated mechanism of the workings of consciousness. Or more and more gains are written on the blank slate of the new science. But still there have been these have the appearance of gathered acquisitions and constructions of a seeking ignorance which tries to know, to understand, to discover, to change, slowly and strugglingly into knowledge. As life here establishes and manages operations with difficulty, a foundation and in an environment of general death. First in the infinitesimal points of life, in quanta of life form and life energy, in increasing aggregates that create more and more complex organisms and intricate life machinery, consciousness also establishes and maintains a growing but precarious light in the darkness of an original science and a universal ignorance. Moreover, the knowledge gain is a phenomena, and not of the reality of things or of the foundation of existence. Wherever our consciousness meets that what seems to be a foundation, that foundation bears the appearance of a blank, when it is not void, an original state which is featureless, and a multitude of consequences which are not inherent in the origin and which nothing in it seems to justify or visibly to necessitate. There is a mass of superstructure which has no clear native relation to the fundamental existence. The first aspect of cosmic existence is an infinite which is to our perception an indeterminate, if not indeterminable. In this infinite, the universe itself, whether in its aspect of energy or its aspect of structure, appears as an indeterminate determination, a boundless finite, a paradoxical but necessary expression which would seem to be indicate that we are face to face with a supra-rational mystery at the base of things. In that universe arise from where a vast number and variety of general and particular denominations which do not appear to be warranted by anything perceptible in the nature of the infinite, but seem to be imposed, or it may be self-imposed upon it. Or we give it to the energy which produces them the name of nature, but the word conveys no meaning unless it is that the nature of things is born. It is by virtue of a force which arranges them according to an inherent truth in them. But the nature of the truth itself, the reason why this indeterminates or what they are is nowhere visible. It has been possibility for human science to detect the process or many processes of material things, but this knowledge does not throw any light on the major question. We do not know even the rationale of the original cosmic processes, for the results do not present themselves as the necessary, but only their pragmatic and actual consequences. And we do not know how these determinates came into or out of the original indeterminate or indeterminable on which they stand forth as on the blank and flat background in the middle of their ordered occurrence. At the origin of things, we are faced with an infinite containing a mass of unexplained finits and indivisible, full of endless divisions and immutable, teeming with of mutations and differentiae. A cosmic paradox is the beginning of all things, a paradox without any key to its significance. It is possible indeed to question the need of positing an infinite which contains our formed universe, although this conception is imperatively demanded by our mind as a necessary basis to its conceptions, for it is unable to fix or assign a limit whether in space or time or essential existence beyond which there is nothing, or before or after which there is nothing. Although to the alternatives of odd or nihil, which can be only an abyss of the infinite into which we refuse to look, an infinite mystic zero of non-existence which would replace an infinite X as a necessary postulate, a basis for our seeing of all that is to us existence. But even if we refuse to recognize anything as real except the limitless expanding finite of the material universe and its streaming denominations, the enigma remains the same: infinite existence, infinite non-being or boundless finite. All are to us original indeterminates or indeterminables. We can assign to them no distinct characters or futures, nothing which would predetermine their determinations. To describe the fundamental characteristic of the universe as space or time or space-time does not help us. For even if these are not abstractions of our intelligence which we impose by our mental view on the cosmos, the mind's necessary perspective of its picture, these are two indeterminates and carry in themselves no clue to the origin of the determinations that take place in them. There is still no expression of the strange process by which things are determined, or of the powers, qualities, and properties, no revelation of the true nature, origin, and significance. Actually, to our science, this infinite or indeterminate existence reveals itself as an energy, known not by itself but by its works, which throws up in its motion of waves of energy, summoning them a multitude of infinitesimals. These grouping themselves to form a larger infinitesimals. Infinitesimals become a basis for all the creations of the energy, even those farthest away from material basis, for the emergence of a world of organized matter, for the emergence of life, for the emergence of conscience, for all the still unexplained activities of evolutionary nature. On the original process are erected a multitude of processes which we can observe, follow, can take advantage of. Many of them utilized, but they are none of them fundamentally explicable. We know now that different groupings and a varying number of electrical infinitesimals can produce or serve as the constitutive occasion miscalled the cause. For the here, there seems to be only a necessary antecedent condition for the appearance of larger atomic infinitesimals of different natures, qualities, powers. But we try to discover how these different dispositions can come to constitute these different atoms, how they differentiate in the constituent Caucasian or cause necessitate the differentiate of the constituent outcome or result. We know also that certain combinations of certain invisible automatic infinitesimals produce or occasion new and visible determinations quite different in nature, quality and power from the constituent infinitesimals, but we fail to discover. For instance, how a fixed formula for the combination of oxygen and hydrogen comes to determine the appearance of a water, which is evidently something more than a combination of gases, a new creation, a new form of substance, a material manifestation of a quite new character. We see that a seed develops into a tree. We follow the line of the process of production and we utilize it, but we do not discover how a tree can grow out of a seed, how the life and form of the tree come to be implied in the substance or energy of the seed. If that be the rather the fact how the seed can develop into a tree, we know that genes and chromosomes are the cause of hereditary transmission not only of physical but of psychological variation, but we do not discover how psychological characteristics can be contained and transmitted in this inconscient material vehicle. We do not know, we do not see or know, but it is expounded to us as a cogent account of natural process, that a play of electrons, of atoms and their resultant molecules, of cells, glands, chemical secretions, and physiological processes managed with other activity on the nerves and brain of a Shakespeare or a Plato to produce, or could be perhaps the dynamic occasion for the production of a Hamlet or a Symposium or a Republic. But we fail to discover or appreciate how such material movements could have composed or necessitated the composition of these highest points of thought and literature. The divergence here of the determinants and the denomination becomes so wide that we are no longer able to follow the process, much less understand or utilize. These formulae of science may be pragmatically correct and infallible, or they may govern the practical how and nature's processes, but they do not disclose the intrinsic how or why, or rather they have the air of the formulae of a cosmic magician, precise, irresistible, automatically successful each in its field, but the rational is fundamentally unintelligible. That is more to perplex us, for we see the original indeterminate energy throwing out general determinates of itself. We might equally in their relation to the variety of the products call them generic indeterminates, but with their appropriate states of substance and determined forms of that substance, the latter or numerous, sometimes innumerable variations of the substance energy, of which is the base, but none of these variations seems to be predetermined by anything in the nature of the generally indeterminate. And electric energy produces positive, negative, neutral form of itself, forms that are at once waves and particles. A gaseous state of energy substance produces a considerable number of different gases. A solid state of energy substance from which results the earth principle develops into different forms of earth and rock of many kinds and numerous minerals and metals. A life principle produces its a vegetable kingdom teeming with a countless poison of quite different plants, trees, flowers. A principle of animal life produces an enormous variety of genus, species, individual variations. So it proceeds into human life and mind its mind types towards the still unwritten end, or perhaps the yet occult sequel of that unfinished evolutionary chapter. Throughout there is the constant rule of a general sameness of the in the originally indeterminate and subject to the substantial sameness of basic substance and nature, a profuse variation in the generic and individual determinates, and identical outlines of the sameness or similarity in the genus or species with numerous variations often meticulously minute in the individual. But you do not find anything in any general or generic determinate necessitating the variant determinations that result from it, a necessity of immutable sameness on the base of free and unaccountable variations on the surface seems to be the law, but who or what necessitates or determines? What is the rationale of the determination? What is its original truth or its significance? What compels or impulses the exuberant play of varying possibilities which seem to have no aim or meaning unless it be the beauty or delight of creation, a mind, a seeking and curious inventive thought, a hidden determining will might be there, but there is no trace of it in the first and fundamental appearance of material nature. A first possible explanation points to a self-organizing dynamic chance that is at work, a paradox necessitated by the appearance of inevitable order on the one side, of unaccountable freak and fantasy on the other side of the cosmic phenomenon we call nature, an inconscient and inconsequent force. We must say that acts as random and creates this or that by a general chance without any determining principle. Determinations coming in only as a result of a persistent repetition of the same rhythm of action and succeeding because only this repetitive rhythm could succeed in keeping things in going. This is the energy of nature, but this implies that somewhere in the origin of things there is a boundless possibility or a womb of innumerable possibilities that are manifested out of it by the original energy, an incalculable inconscient which we find some embarrassment in calling either an existence or a non-existent, for without some such origin and basis the appearance and the action of the energy is unintelligible. Yet an opposite aspect of the nature of the cosmic phenomenon as we see it appears to forbid the theory of a random action generating a persistent order. There is too much of an iron insistence on order on a law basing on the possibilities. One would be justified rather in supposing that there is an inherent imperative truth of things unseen by us, but a truth capable of manifold manifestation, throwing out a multitude of possibilities and variants of itself, which the creative energy by its action turns into so many realized actualities. This brings us to a second explanation, a mechanical necessity in things. Its workings recognizable by us as so many mechanical laws of nature, the necessary, or might say, of some such secret inherent truth of things as we have supposed, governing automatically the processes we observe in action in the universe, but a theory of mechanical necessity by itself does not illustrate the free play of endless and unaccountable variations which are visible in the evolution. There must be behind the necessary or in it a law of unity associated with a coexistence by dependent law of multiplicity, but both existing on manifestation by the unity of what, the multiplicity of what. A mechanical necessity can give no answer. Again, the emergence of consciousness out of the inconscient is a stumbling block on the way of this theory, for it is a phenomenon which can have no place in an all-pervading truth of inconscient mechanical necessity. If there is a necessity which compels the emergence, it can be only this, that there is already a consciousness concealed in the inconscient, waiting for the evolution, and when all is ready, breaking out from its prison of apparent existence. We may indeed get rid of the difficulty of the imperative order of things by supposing that it does not exist. That determination in nature is imposed on it by our thought, which needs such an imperative order to enable it to deal with its surroundings. But in reality, there is no such thing. There is only a force experimenting in a random action of infinitesimals, which would build in that general results different denominations by repetitive persistence operative in the sum of their actions. Thus we go back from necessity to chance as the basis of our existence. But what then is the mind? Is this mind, this consciousness which differs so radically from the energy that produces it that for its action it has to impose its idea or need of order on the world she has made and in which it is obliged to live. There would then be the double contradiction of consciousness emerging from a fundamental inconsciousness of a mind of order and reason manifesting as the brilliant final consequence of a world created by inconscient chance. All these things may be possible, but they need a better explanation than any yet given before. We can accord to them our acceptance. This opens the way for other explanations which make consciousness the creator of this world out of an apparent original inconscious. A mind, a will, seems to have imagined and organized the universe, but it has veered itself behind its creation. Its first erection has been its screen of inconscient energy and a material form of substance, advanced in a disguise of its presence and a plastic creative basis on which it could work as an artisan uses for its production of forms and patterns and dumb and obedient material. All these things we see around us are then the thoughts of an extra cosmic divinity, a being with an omnipotent and omniscient mind and will, who is responsible for the mathematical law of the physical universe, for its artistry of beauty, for its strange play of sameness and variations of accordances and discords of combining and intermingling opposites, for the drama of consciousness struggling to exist and seeking to affirm itself in an inconscient universal order. The fact that this divinity is invisible to us, undiscoverable by our mind and senses, offers no difficulty, since self-evidence or direct sign of an extra cosmic creator could not be expected in a cosmos which is void of his presence. The pattern signals everywhere of the works of an intelligence, of law, design, formula, adaptation of means to end, constant and inexhaustible invention, fantasy even but restrained by an ordering reason might be considered sufficient proof of this origin of things. Or if this creator is not entirely supracosmic but is also immanent in his works, even then there need be no other sign of him, except indeed to some consciousness evolving in this inconscient world, but only when its evolution reached a point at which it could become aware of the indwelling presence. The interventions of this evolving consciousness would not be a difficulty, since there would be no contradiction of the basic nature of things in its appearance. An omnipotent mind could easily infuse something of itself into its creatures. One difficulty remains. It is the arbitrary nature of the creation, the incomprehensibility of its purpose, the crude meaningless of its law of unnecessary ignorance. Strife and suffering is an ending without denouement or issue, a play, but why the step of so many undivine elements and characters in the play of one whose nature must be supposed to be divine? To the suggestion that what we see worked out in the world is the thoughts of God, the retort can be made that God could well have made better thoughts, and the best thought of all would have been to refrain from the creation of an unhappy and unintelligible universe. All theistic explanation of existence starting from an extra cosmic deity stumble over this difficulty and can only evade it. It would disappear only the creator were, even though exceeding the creation, yet immanent in it, himself in the some sort, both the player and the player, infinite casting infinite possibilities into the set form of an evolutionary cosmic order. On that hypothesis, there must be behind the action of the material energy a secret involved consciousness, cosmic infinite, building up through the action of that frontal energy its means of an evolutionary manifestation, a creation of itself in the boundless finite of the material universe. The apparent inconscious of the material energy would be an indispensable condition for the structure of the material world substance in which this consciousness intends to involve itself, so that it may grow by evolution of its apparent opposites. For without some such device, the complete evolution would be impossible. If there is such a creation by the infinite out of itself, it must be the manifestation in a material disguise of truths or powers of its own being. The forms or vehicles of these truths or powers would be the basic, general or fundamental determinants we see in nature. The particular determinants which otherwise we are unaccountable variations that have emerged from the vague general stuff in which they originate would be the appropriate forms or vehicles of the possibilities of the truths or powers residing in this fundamental board with them. The principle of free variations of possibilities in natural to an infinite consciousness would be the explanation of the aspect of inconscience, chance of which we are aware in the workings of nature, inconscient only in appearance, also apparent because of the complete involution in matter, or because of the veil with which the secret consciousness disguises present. The principle of truth's real powers of infinite imperatively fulfilling themselves would be the explanation of the opposite aspect of a mechanical necessity which we see in nature, mechanical in appearance only and so appearing because of the same veil of inconscience. It would then be perfectly intelligible why the inconscient does its work with a constant principle of mathematical architecture, of design, of effective arrangements of numbers, of adaptation of means to ends, of inexhaustible device and invention. One might almost say a constant experimental skill and an automatism of purpose. The appearance of consciousness out of an apparent inconscience would also be no longer inexplicable. All the unexplained processes of nature would find their meaning and the place if this hypothesis proved to be terrible. Energy seems to create substance, bad in reality, as existence is inherent in consciousness force. So also substance would be inherent in energy. The energy a manifestation of the force, substance a manifestation of secret existence. But as it is a spiritual substance, it will not be apprehended by the material sense until it is given by energy the forms of matter seizable by that sense. One begins to understand also how arrangement of design, quantity and number can be a base for the manifestation of quality and property. For design, quantity and number of other or powers of the existent substance, quality and property are powers of the consciousness and its force that reside in the existence. They can then be made manifest and operated by a rhythm and process of substance. The growth of a tree out of the seed could be accounted for, like all other similar phenomena, by the indwelling presence of what we have called the real idea, the infinite self-perception of the significant form, the loving body of its power of existence, and that has to emerge from its own self-comprehension. Compression in energy substance would be carried internally in the form of the seed, carried in the occult consciousness involved in that form, and would naturally evolve out of it. There would be no difficulty either in understanding of this principle how infinitesimals of a material character like the gene and the chromosome can carry in them psychological elements to be transmitted to the physical form that has to emerge from the human seed. It would be at bottom of the same principle in the objectivity of matter as that which we find in our subjective experience. For we see that the subconscious physical carries in it a mental psychological content. Impressions of positives, habits, fixed mental and vital formations of fixed forms of character and sends them up by an occult process by the working consciousness, thus originating or influencing many activities of our nature. On the same basis, there would be no difficulty in understanding why this physiological functioning of the body helps to determine the mind's psychological actions. For the body is not mere unconscious matter, it is a structure of a secretly conscious energy that has taken form in it, itself occultly conscious. It is, at the same time, the vehicle of expression of an overt consciousness that has emerged and is self-aware in our physical energy substance. The body's functionings are a necessary machinery or instrumentation for the movements of this mental inhabitant. It is only by setting the corporeal instrument in motion that the conscious being emerging, evolving in it, can transmit its mind formations, will formations, and turn them into a physical formation, manifestation of itself in matter. The capacity, the process of the instrument must be to a certain extent reshape the mind formations in the transitions from mental shape into physical experience. Physical expressions. Its workings are necessary and must exercise their influence before that expression can become actual. The bodily instrument may even in some directions dominate its user. It may too, by a force of habit, suggest or create involuntary reactions of the consciousness inhabiting it before the working mind and will can control or interfere. All this is possible because the body has a subconscious consciousness of its own which counts in our total self-expression. Even if you look at this outer instrumentation only, we can conclude that body determines mind. But this is the only a minor truth, and the major truth is that the mind determines body. In this view, still deeper truth becomes conceivable. A spiritual entity ensouling the substance that wields it is the original determinant of both the mind and body. On the other side, in the opposite order of process, that by which the mind can transmit its ideas and commands to the body, can train it to be an instrument for a new action, can even so impress it with its habitual demands or orders that the physical instinct carries them out automatically even when the mind is no longer consciously willing them. Those also more unusual but well attested by which and to an extraordinary and hardly illimitable extent the mind can learn to determine the reactions of the body even to the overriding of its normal law or conditions of action. These and other otherwise unaccountable aspects of the relation between these two elements of our being can being become easily understandable. For it is the secret consciousness, the living matter that results from its greater companion. It is this in the body that it in its own inward and occult fashion pursues or feels the demand on it and obeys the emerged or owl consciousness which presides over the body. Finally, the conception of a divine mind and will creating the cosmos becomes justifiable, while at the same time the perplexing elements in it which our reasoning mentality refuses to ascribe to an arbitrary fiat of the Creator find their explanation as the inevitable phenomenon of a consciousness emerging with difficulty out of its opposite but with a mission to override this contrary phenomenon manifest by slow and difficult evolution its greater reality and true nature. But an operational material end of existence cannot give us any certitude of validity for this hypothesis or for that matter for any other explanation of nature and procedure. The veil cast by the original inconscience is too thick for the mind to pierce, and it is behind this veil that is hidden the secret origination of what is manifested. There are seated the truths and powers underlying the phenomenon processes that appear to us in the material front of nature. To know the greater certitude, we must follow the curve of evolving consciousness until it arrives at a height and largeness of self-enlightenment in which the primal secret is self-discovered. For presumably it must evolve, must eventually bring out what was held from the beginning by the occult original consciousness in things of which it is a gradual manifestation. In life, it would be clearly hopeless to seek for the truth, for life begins with a formulation in which consciousness is still submental, and therefore to us as mental beings appear as inconscient or at most subconscious. And our investigation into this stage of life, studying it from outside, cannot be more fruitful of the secret truth than our examination of matter. Even when mind develops in life, its first functional aspect is a mentality involved in action, in vital and physical needs and preoccupations, in impulses, desires, sensations, emotions, unable to stand back from these things and observe, and know them. In the human mind, there is the first scope or hope of understanding, discovery, a free comprehension. Here we might seem to be coming to the possibility of self-knowledge and world knowledge, but in fact our mind can at first only observe facts and processes, and for the rest it has to make deductions and inferences, to construct hypotheses, to reason, to speculate. In order to discover the secret consciousness, it would have to know itself and determine the reality of its own being and process. But as in animal life, the emerging consciousness is involved in vital action and movement, so in the human being, mind consciousness is involved in its own whirl of thoughts and activity in which it is carried on without a rest, and in which it is very reasonings and speculations are determined in the tendency, trend, conditions of by its own temperament, a mental turn, past formations and line of energy, inclination, preference, and inborn natural selection. We do not freely determine our thinking according to the truth of things. It is determined by us by our nature. We can indeed stand back with a certain detachment and observe the workings of the mental energy in us, but it is still only its process that we see and not any original source of our mental determinations. We can build theories and hypotheses of the process of mind, but a veil is still there over the inner secrets of ourselves, our consciousness, our total nature. It is only when we follow the yogic process of quieting the mind itself into it that a profounder results of our self-observation becomes possible. For first we discover that mind is a subtle substance, a general determinate or a generic indeterminate, which mental energy when it operates throws into forms or particular determinations of itself, thoughts, concepts, pulses, mental sentiments, activities of will and reactions of feeling, but which, when the energy is quiescent, can live either in an inert torpor or an immobile silence and peace of self-existence. And next we see that the determinations of mind do not all proceed from itself, for waves and currents of mental energy enter into it from outside. They take form in it or appear already formed from some universal mind or from other minds and are accepted by us as our own thinking. Or we can pursue also an occult or supplemental mind in ourselves from which thoughts and perceptions and will impulses and mental feelings arise. Or we can pursue to higher planes of consciousness from which a superior mind energy works through us or upon us. Finally, we discover that which observes all this is a mental being supporting the mind, substance and mind energy. Without this presence, their upholder and source of sanctions, they could not exist or operate. This mental being or Purusha first appears as a silent witness, and if that were all, we would have to accept the determinations of mind as a phenomenal activity imposed upon the being by nature, by Prakriti, or else as a creation present to it by Prakriti, a world of thought which nature constructs and offers to the observing Purusha. But afterwards we find that the Purusha, the mental being, can depart from its posture of a silent or accepting witness. It can become the source of reactions, accept, reject, even rule and regulate, or become the giver of the command. The knower, knowledge also arises that this mind substance manifests the mental being in its own expressive substance, and the mental energy is its own consciousness force. So that it is reasonable to conclude that all mind determinations arise from the being of the Purusha. But this conclusion is complicated by the fact that from another viewpoint, our personal mind seems to be a little more than a formation of the universal mind, and an engine for the reception, modification, propagation of cosmic thought waves, idea currents, will suggestions, waves of feelings, sense suggestions, form suggestions. It has no doubt its own already realized expression, predispositions, propensities, personal temperament and nature. What comes from the universal can only find a place there if it is accepted and assimilated into a self-expression of the individual mental being, the personal Prakriti of the Purusha. But still, in view of these complexities, the question remains right now whether all this evolution action is a phenomenal creation by some unusual energy presented to the mental being, or an activity imposed by mind energy on an Purusha indeterminate or perhaps indeterminable existence, or whether the whole is something predetermined by some dynamic truth of self within and only manifested on the mind surface. To know what we would have to touch or to enter into a cosmic state of being and consciousness, to be the totality of things and their integral principle would be better manifest that to our limited mind experience. Overmind consciousness is such a state or principle beyond individual mind, beyond even universal mind in the ignorance. It carries in itself a first direct and masterful cognition of cosmic truth. Here then, we might hope to understand something of the original workings of things, get some insight into the fundamental movements of cosmic nature. One thing indeed becomes clear. It is self-evident here that both the individual and the cosmos come from a transcendent reality which takes form in them. The mind and life of the individual being itself in nature must therefore be a partial self-expression of the cosmic being, and both through and that directly a self-expression of the transcendent, a reality, a conditional and obvious expression it may be. But still, that is its significance. But also we see that the expression shall be is also determined by the individual himself. Only that what he can in his nature receive, assimilate, formulate, his portion of the cosmic being or of the reality can find shape in his mind and life and physical pause, something that derives from reality, something that is in the cosmic he expresses, cosmos he expresses, but in the terms of his own self-expression, in the terms of his own nature. But the original question set out for us by the phenomenon of universe is not solved by the overmind knowledge. The question in this case, whether the building of the thought experience, world of perceptions of the mental person, the mind of Purusha is truly a self-expression of this, a self-determination proceeding from some truth of his own spiritual being, a manifestation of the truth's dynamic possibilities, or whether it is not rather a creation or construction present within by nature, by Prakriti, only in the sense of being individualized in his personal formation of that nature can it be said to be his own or dependent on him. Or again, it might be a play of cosmic imagination, a fantasy of the infinite imposed on the blank, indeterminable of his own eternal pure existence. These are the three views of creation that seem to have an equal chance of being right, and mind is incapable of definitely deciding between them. For each view is armed with its own mental logic and its appeal to intuition and experience. Over mind seems to add to the perplexity for the over mental view of things, allows each possibility to formulate itself in its own independent right and realize its own existence in cognition, in dynamic self-presentation, in substantiating experience. In over mind, in all the higher ranges of the mind, we find recurring the dichotomy of a pure silent self without future or qualities or relations, self-existent, self-poised, self-sufficient, and the mighty dynamism of a determinative knowledge power of a creative consciousness and force which precipitates itself into the forms of the universe. This opposition, which is yet a collocation as if there is two correlatives or complementaries, although apparent contradictions of each other, sublimates itself into the coexistence of any personal Brahman without qualities, a fundamental divine reality free from all relations or determinants, and a Brahman with infinite qualities, a fundamental divine reality who is the source and container and master of all relations and determinations, Nirguna, Suguna, Saguna. If we pursue the Nirguna idea, farthest possible self-experience, we arrive at a supreme absolute word of all relations and determinations, the ineffable first and last word of existence. If we enter through the Saguna into some ultimate possible of experience, we arrive at a divine absolute, a personal supreme and a omnipresent Godhead, a transcendent as well as universal, an infinite master of all relations and determinations who can hold in his being a million universes and pervade each with a single ray of his self-light and a single degree of his ineffable existence. The whole mind consciousness made us equally these two truths of eternal which face the mind as mutually exclusive alternatives. It admits both as supreme aspects of one reality. Somewhere then behind them there must be a still greater transcendence which originates them or opposes them both in its supreme eternity. But what can that be of which is such opposites or equal truths, unless it be of original indeterminable mystery of which any knowledge, any understanding by the mind is impossible? Or we can know it indeed to some degree, in some kind of experience or realization, by its aspects, powers, constant series of fundamental negatives and positives through which we have to pursue it, independently in either or integrally in both together. But in the last resort, it seems to escape even from the highest mentality and remain unknowable. But if the supreme absolute is indeed pure, indeterminable, then no creation, no manifestation, no universe is possible. And yet the universe exists. What then is it that creates this contradiction? Is able to affect the impossible, bring this insoluble riddle of self-division into existence. A power of some kind it must be, and since the absolute is the sole reality, the one version of all things, this power must proceed from it, must have some relation with it, a connection, a dependence, for it is quite other than the supreme reality, a cosmic imagination imposing its determinations on the eternal blank of the indeterminable, than the sole existence of an absolute para-Brahman is no longer admissible. That is then a dualism of the source of things, not substantial different from the Sankhya dualism of soul and nature. If it is a power, the soul power indeed of the absolute, we have this logical impossibility that the existence of the supreme being and the power of his existence are entirely opposite to each other, two supreme contradictories. For Brahman is free from all possibility of relations and determination, but Maya is a creative. imagination imposing these very things upon it, and originator of relations and determination of it, Brahman must necessarily be the superior and witness to the logical reason and inadmissible formula. If it is accepted, it can only be as a supra-rational mystery, something neither real nor unreal, inexplicable in its nature, Anirvakania. But the difficulties are so great that it can be accepted only if it imposes itself irresistibly as the inevitable ultimate, the end and summit of metaphysical inquiry and spiritual experience. For even if all things are illusory creations, they must have at least a subjective existence, that they can exist nowhere except in the consciousness of the soul existence. They are then subject to determinations of the indeterminable. If, on the contrary, the determinations of this power are real creations out of what they are determined, what is their substance? It is not possible that they are made out of nothing, a non-existence other than the absolute, for that will erect a new dualism, a great positive zero over against the greater indeterminable. X we have supposed to be one of reality. It is evident, therefore, that the reality cannot be a rigid indeterminable. Whatever is the created must be of it and in it, and what is of substance of the utterly real must itself be real. A vast, baseless negation of reality purporting to be real cannot be the sole outcome of the eternal truth, the infinite existence. It is perfectly understandable that the absolute is and must be indeterminable in the sense that it cannot be limited by any determination or any sum of possible determinations, but not in the sense that it is incapable of self-determination. The supreme existence cannot be incapable of creating true self-determinations of its being, incapable of upholding a real self-creation or manifestation in a self-existence infinite over mind, and gives us no final and positive solution. It is a supramental cognition beyond it that we are left to seek for an answer. A supramental truth consciousness advanced the self-awareness of the infinite and eternal, and a power of self-determination inherent in that self-awareness, the first in its foundation and status, the second in its power of being, the dynamics of its self-existence, all that a timeless eternity of self-awareness sees in itself as truth of being, the conscious power of its being manifest in time eternity to supermind. Therefore, the supreme is not a rigid indeterminable, an all-negating absolute, an infinite of being complete to itself in its own immutable purity of existence, its sole power is self-pure consciousness, able only to dwell on the being's changeless eternity, on the immobile delight of its sheer self-existence. It is not the whole reality. The infinite of being must also be an infinite of power, containing in itself an eternal repose and quiescence. It must also be capable of an eternal action and creation, but this too must be an action in itself, a creation out of its own self, eternal and infinite, since there could be nothing else out of which it could create. Any basis of creation seeming to be other than itself must still be really in itself, out of itself, and could not be something foreign to its existence. An infinite power cannot be solely a force resting on a pure inactive sameness, an immutable quiescence. It must have in it endless powers of its being and energy, an infinite consciousness of the role within it endless truths of its own self-awareness. These in action would appear to our cognition as aspects of its being, to our spiritual sense as powers and movements of its dynamics, to our aesthesis as instruments and formulations of its delight of existence. Creation would then be a self-manifestation. It would be an ordered deploying of the infinite possibilities of the infinite. But every possibility implies a truth of being behind it, a reality in the existence. For without that supporting truth, that could be nothing. That could not be any possibilities. In manifestation, a fundamental reality of the existence would appear to our cognition as a fundamental spiritual aspect of the divine absolute. Out of it would emerge all its possible manifestation, its inner dynamisms. These again must create or rather bring out a non-manifest latency in their own significant forms, expressive powers, native processes. Their own being would develop their own becoming, Swarupa Swabhava. This then would be the complete process of creation. But in our mind, we do not see the complete process. We see only possibilities that determine themselves into actualities. And though we infer or conjecture, we are not sure of a necessity, a predetermining truth, an imperative behind them which capacitates the possibilities, desires the actualities. Our mind is an observer of actuals, an inventor of discoverer of possibilities, but not a seer of occult imperatives that necessitate the moments and forms of creation. For in the front of universal existence, there are only forces determining results by some balance of meeting of their powers, the original determinant or determinants. If it or they exist or veil from us by our ignorance. But in the supramental truth consciousness, these imperatives would be apparent, would be the very stuff of its seeing and experience. In the supramental creative process, the imperatives, the nexus of possibilities, the resultant actualities would be a single whole. An individual moment, the possibilities and actualities would carry in themselves the inevitability of their originating imperative. All the results, all the creation would be the body of the truth which they manifest in predetermined significant forms and powers of the whole existence. Our fundamental cognition of the absolute, our substantial spiritual experience of it is the intuition of the direct experience of an infinite and eternal existence, an infinite and eternal consciousness, an infinite and eternal delight of existence. existence. In the over mental and mental cognition, it is possible to make discrete and even to separate this original unity to three self-existent aspects. For we can experience a pure, causeless, eternal bliss so intense that we are that alone. Existence, consciousness seems to be swallowed up in it, no longer ostensibly in presence. A similar experience of pure and absolute consciousness and a similar exclusive identity with it is possible. And there can be two. A like identifying experience of pure and absolute existence, but a superman cognition that these three are always an inseparable trinity, even though one can stand in front of the others and manifest its own spiritual determinants, for each has its primal aspects or its inherent self-formations, but all of this together are original to the triune absolute. Love, joy, and beauty are the fundamental determinants of the divine delight of existence, and we can see at once that these are the very stuff and nature of the delight. They are not alien imposition of the being of the absolute or creation supported by it, but outside it. They are truths of its being, native to its consciousness, powers of its force of existence. So too is it with the fundamental determinants of the absolute consciousness, knowledge and will. They are truths and powers of the original consciousness force and are inherent in its very nature. This authenticity becomes still more evident when we regard the fundamental spiritual determinants of the absolute existence. They are its triune powers, necessary for postulates for all its self-creation or manifestation. Self, the divine, the conscious being, Atman, Ishvara, Purusha. If we pursue the process of self-manifestation further, we shall see that each of these aspects or powers reposes in its first action or a triad of trinity. For knowledge inevitably takes its stand in a trinity of knower, the known and knowledge. Love finds itself in a trinity of the lover, the beloved, the love. A will is self-fulfilled in a trinity of Lord of the will, the object of the will, and the executive force. Joy is its original and utter gladness in a trinity of the enjoyer, and the delight that unites them. A self as inevitably appears and finds its manifestation in a trinity of self as a subject, or self as object and self-awareness holding together self as subject-object. These are the primal powers and aspects assume their status among the fundamental spiritual self-determinations of the infinite. All of these are determinants of the fundamental spiritual determinants, significant relations, significant powers, significant forms of being, consciousness, force, delight, energies, conditions, ways, lines of the truth of process of the consciousness force of the eternal, imperatives, possibilities, actualities of its manifestation. All this deploying of powers and possibilities and their inherent consequences held together by supermind cognition in an intimate oneness. It keeps them founded consciously on the original truth and maintaining the harmony of the truths they manifest and are in their nature. And there is here no imposition of the imaginations, no arbitrary creation, neither is there any division, fragmentation, irreconcilable contrariety or disparateness. But in mind of ignorance, these phenomena appear, for there is a limited consciousness sees and deals with everything as if all were separate objects of cognition or separate existences, and it seeks to know. It seeks so to know, possess and enjoy them, and gets mastery over them or suffers their mastery. But behind its ignorance, what the soul in it is seeking for is the reality, the truth, the consciousness, the power, the delight by which they exist. The mind has to learn to awaken to this truth seeking and true knowledge of real within itself, to the reality from which all things hold their truth, to the consciousness of which all conscious or entities, to the power from which all get what force of being they have within them, to the delight of which all delights are partial figures. This limitation of consciousness, this awakening to the integrality of consciousness, or also a process of self-manifestation or a self-determination of the spirit, even when contrary to the truth in their appearances. The things of the limited consciousness have in the deeper sense and reality of a divine significance. They do bring out a truth or a possibility of the infinite, of some such nature as far as it can be expressed in mental formulas, would be the supramental cognition of things which sees the one truth everywhere and would so arrange its account to us of our existence, its report of the secret creation and the significance of the universe. At the same time, indeterminability is also a necessary element in our conception of the absolute in our spiritual experience. This is the other side of the supramental regard of the being out of things. The absolute is not illimitable or indefinable by any one determination or by any sum of determinations. On the other side, it is not bound down to an indeterminable vacancy of pure existence. On the contrary, it is the source of all determinations. Its indeterminability is the natural, the necessary condition both of its infinity of being and its infinity of power of being. It can be infinitely all things because it is no thing in particular and exceeds any definable totality. It is this essential indeterminability of the absolute that translates itself into our consciousness through the fundamentally negative positives of a spiritual experience, the immobile, immutable self, the Nirguna Brahman, the eternal without qualities, the pure futureless, one existence, the impersonal, the silence, word of activity is the non-being, the ineffable and the unknowable. On the other side, it is the essence and source of all determinations, and this dynamic essentiality manifests to us through the fundamental affirming possibility in which the absolute equally meets us. For it is this self that becomes all things, the Saguna Brahman, the eternal with infinite qualities, the one who is the many, the infinite person who is the source of the foundation of all person and personalities, the Lord of grace and the birth, the master of all works and action. It is that which, being known, all is known. These affirmatives correspond to those negatives, for it is not possible in supramental cognition to split asunder the two sides of the one existence, even to speak of them as sides is excessive, for they are in each other. Their coexistence or one existence is eternal, and their power sustaining each other form the self-manifestation of the infinite. But neither is a separate cognition of them entirely an illusion or a complete error of the ignorant. This too has its validity for spiritual experience. For this primary aspect of the absolute or fundamental spiritual determinates or indeterminates, answering as the spiritual end or beginning to the general determinates or generic determinates of the material and or inconscient beginning of the descending and ascending manifestation. Those that seem towards negative carry in them the freedom of the infinite from a limitation by its own determinations. Their realization disengages the spirit with it, liberates us and enables us to participate in the supremacy. Thus, when we pass into or through the experience of immutable self, we are no longer bound and limited in the status of our being by the determinations and creation of nature. On the dynamic side, this original freedom enables the consciousness to create a world of denomination without being bound by it. It enables it also to withdraw from what it has created and recreate in it a higher truth formula. It is on this freedom that it is based on the spirit's power of infinite variations of the truth possibilities of existence, and also its capacity to create without trying to tying itself to its workings any and every form of necessity or system of order. The individual being too, by experience of this negating absolutes, can participate in the dynamic liberty, can pass from one order of self-formulation to the higher order. At this stage, from the mental it has to move towards its supramental status, one most liberatingly helpful, if not indispensable experience that may intervene is the entry into a total nirvana of mentality and mental ego, a passage into the silence of the spirit. In any case, the realization of the pure self must always precede the transition to that mediating eminence of the consciousness from which a clear vision of the ascending and descending states of manifested existence commanded in the position of the free will of ascent and descent becomes a spiritual prerogative, an independent completeness of identity with each of the primal aspects of the and powers, not narrowing as in the mind into a soul engrossing experience seeming to be final and integral. For that would be incompatible with the realization of the unity of all aspects and powers of existence. It is a capacity inherent in consciousness of the infinite. That in it is the base and justification of the whole mind cognition and its will to carry each aspect, each power, each possibility to its independent fullness. But the Superman keeps always and in every status of condition, the spiritual realization of the unity of all, the intimate presence of that unity is there even within the completest grasp of each state given its sole delight of itself, power and value. There is thus no losing sight of the affirmative aspects, even when there is the full acceptance of the truth of the negative. The woman keeps still the sense of the underlying unity. That is for it a secure base of the independent experience. In mind, the knowledge of the unity of all aspects is lost on the surface. The consciousness plunges into the engrossing, exclusive, separate affirmations. But that too, even in the mind's ignorance, the total reality still remains behind the exclusive absorption and can be recovered in the form of profound mental intuition, or else in the idea of the sentiments of an underlying truth of integral oneness. In the spiritual mind, this can develop into an ever-present experience. All aspects of omnipresent reality have their fundamental truth in the supreme existence, thus even the aspect or power of inconscience, which seems to be an opposite, a negation of the eternal reality, yet corresponds to a truth held in itself by the self-aware and all-conscious infinite. It is, or one will look closely at it, the infinite power of plunging the consciousness into a trance of self-involution, a self-oblivion of the spirit veiled in its own abysses where nothing is manifest but all inconceivably is and can emerge from that ineffable latency. In the heights of the spirit, the state of cosmic or infinite trance-sleep appears to our cognition as a luminous uttermost superconscious. At the other end of being, it offers itself to cognition as a spirit's potency of present in itself, the opposites of its own truths of being, an abyss of non-existence, a profound night of inconscience, a fathomless swoon of insensibility from which yet all forms of being, consciousness and delight of existence can manifest themselves, but they appear in limited terms, in slowly emerging and increasing self-formulations, even in the contrary terms of themselves. It is the play of secret all being, all delight, all knowledge, but it observes the rules of its own self-oblivion, self-opposition, self-limitation until it is ready to surpass it. This is the inconscience and ignorance that we see at work in the material universe. It is not a denial, it is one term, one formula of the infinite and eternal existence. It is important to observe here the sense that is acquired in such a total cognition of cosmic being, but the phenomenon of the ignorance. It is assigned place in the spiritual economy of the universe. If all that we experience were an imposition, an unreal creation of the absolute, both cosmic and individual existence would be in their very nature and ignorance. The sole real knowledge would be the indeterminable self-awareness of the absolute. If all were the erection of a temporal and phenomenal creation over against the reality of the witnessing all-encompassing, timeless, eternal, and if the creation were not a manifestation of the reality but an arbitrary, self-effective cosmic construction, that would be a sort of imposition. Our knowledge of the creation would be the knowledge of a temporary structure of awareness and consciousness and being, a dubious becoming that passes across the vision of the eternal, not a knowledge of reality. That too would be an ignorance. But if all is a manifestation of the reality and itself real by the constituting immanence, the substantiating essence and presence of the reality, then the awareness of the individual being and the world being would be in its spiritual original nature a play of the infinite self-knowledge and all knowledge. Ignorance could be only a subordinate movement, a suppressed or restricted cognition, or a partial and imperfect evolving knowledge with the true and total self-awareness and all awareness concealed both in it and behind it. It would be a temporary phenomenon, not the cause, the essence of cosmic existence. Its inevitable consummation would be the return of the spirit, not out of the cosmos to a sole supracosmic self-awareness, but even in the cosmos itself to an integral self-knowledge and all knowledge. It might be objected that the supramental cognition is, after all, not the truth of final truth of things, beyond the supramental plane of consciousness, which is the intermediate step from the whole mind and mind to the complete experience of Satchidananda, or the greatest rise of the manifested spirit. Here, surely existence would not at all be based on the determination of the one in the multiplicity. It would be manifest solely and simply a pure identity in oneness. But the supramental truth consciousness would not be absent from these planes, for it is an inherent power of Satchidananda. The difference would be that the determination would not be demarcations, they would be plastic, interfused, each in a boundless unit. For there all is in each and each is in all, radically and integrally. There would be to the utmost a fundamental awareness of identity, a mutual inclusion of an interpenetration of consciousness. Knowledge as we envisage it would not exist because it would not be needed, since all would be direct action of consciousness. In being itself, identical, intimate, intrinsically self-aware and all-aware, but still relations of consciousness, relations of mutual delight of existence, relations of self-power of being, with self-power of being would not be excluded. This higher spiritual planes would not be a field of blank indeterminability, a vacancy of pure existence. It might be said again that, even so, in Satchidananda itself, at least above all worlds of manifestation, there would be nothing but the self-awareness of pure existence and consciousness and a pure delight of existence. Or, indeed, this triumph being itself might well be only a trinity of original spiritual self-determinations of the infinite. These two, like all determinations, would cease to exist in the ineffable absolute. But our position is that there must be inherent truths of the Supreme Being, that utmost reality must be pre-existent absolute, even if they are ineffably other than what they are in the spiritual mind's highest possible experience. The Absolute is not a mystery of infinite blankness nor a supreme sum of negations. Nothing can manifest that is not justified by some self-power of the original and omnipresent reality.